How
Welcome,
are
gang.
you?
I'm doing all right. How about you?
Good.
Yeah.
I was melting some scrap. I'm gonna pound and put in the rolling mill so I can create some flat.
Nice.
It started because I wanted to do the cup, and then it was like, don't really have anything right now.
Oh, no. So you don't have any sheet silver already made for scraps?
Some, but not the right gauge.
Yeah, that scrap piles up, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So I was experimenting because I got one of those tiny little black things. I forget what you call them. And
An
you're
ingot mold?
supposed, yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
But I haven't used it. I'm so used to putting it on the brick.
Putting
So
it,
I
putting
know
it
you
on the
have
what?
to, the brick,
Oh, okay. Yep.
the flat, but then I don't get a nice big chunk, which is what I really would like.
Yep. Yeah, the trick with ingot molds is making sure that you've got them well carbonized before you pour into them, and that they're heated up before you pour into them. Because if you pour cold, it's just going to solidify and not make the shape that you want.
So when you say carbonize, what do you mean?
Yeah, so you can either, if you have a scrap of charcoal block, you can mark it up. It's like putting down baking spray before you put cookies in the pan.
Okay.
And so it gives a coating that will let it easily release once it's in place. If you don't have a charcoal block, you can, if you have an acetylene torch, but not air included in it, you can cover over the holes of the acetylene torch and make it do the blackening that it does when it burns hot, when it burns awful, and hold your mold above that, and it'll char the coating on it. And it's just a powder coat to keep it from sticking when you're pouring molten metal in. But the biggest thing is that I always invariably forget the first time I go back to trying to cast something is remembering to get the mold up to heat before you start pouring into it. So you can't just leave it cold. Otherwise you'll never get a good long pour out of it.
Okay.
Anyway, what else are people up to? How's everybody? Betsy, you doing any work this week?
I've been doing a lot of piercing. I haven't been doing a lot of stones or anything. I'm just working on some floral pierced designs, which
Nice.
I'm zenning out a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, piercing isn't so much my zenning. Chain making is my zen. I just
do that too.
Never enjoyed the piercing enough to like concentrate on a piece. I appreciate the heck out of people who do, that have the patience to do all the tiny little things.
I didn't used to, and you know, I don't know, maybe it's because I changed saw blades and these are much easier. But
yeah, that could be it. I started out
really,
with some pretty junky equipment, so
yeah. So I don't know. I just go through my, you know, phases.
Nice,
So,
nice.
but
totally
I'm loving this.
that.
I'm loving this because I'm learning a lot from you. And I found my old Cogswell notes, and you know, comparing them. But
yeah. Any surprises in the notes? Because I don't know whether he changed his teaching style through the years too. I know mine evolves.
No, but it was mostly, it was a basket setting and stuff we haven't really done yet. So,
Yeah.
and it was mostly the setting part. So, but you know, I like, you know, I'm really enjoying listening and watching the process, you know, because I learn a lot more that way than, you know, than other ways. So
Yeah,
thank you for doing this.
I'm a perpetual student, and also it makes me a better teacher to be a student. So I enjoy it a lot. We'll give people another minute or two and then get going. It looks like we might have a small crew this time around. Anybody else have anything exciting they're working on that they want to share before we get started?
This is what I have.
Yep. Oh, so it's already what's the material that's made out of? So you may not need to carbonate. You may not need to get the blackening on that because it's already made out of.
You just have to heat it, really.
Yeah, just heat it.
Do I have to put boric acid?
So in your when you're smelting your metal, you're not melting your metal in that. You're melting it in something that you're pouring into that, right?
Okay. Yeah.
So in that, yes, because what that does is it cleans the impurities of your metal out. And I was always taught that you add a little bit of fresh silver when you're working with scrap. There are many people who can tell you more about casting than me, because I don't do a whole heck of a lot of it. I tend to do small scale stuff with my scrap, like water casting and things like that. But yeah, there's some like Jim Binion, it writes extent. If you want to get into the science geekery of how metals are blended together, he's got a bunch of really scientific articles, and he talks about making different blends of metal, because that's what he does as part of his Mokame.
I wrote a whole book on it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, the only thing that I make my own specific blend of is John teaches how to do reticulation silver. That is a slightly different blend than a lot of other producers of it use. And I like his reticulation silver, so I've done that twice
that's
now.
something that I haven't done that I've been wanting to do. So I do still have my little containers with, whenever I have scrap, I try to keep the same kind of metal in little containers.
Good call. Yeah.
Because sometimes I don't know what I have. Because sometimes people just say, oh, this broke on me, you can just have it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, that goes in the miscellaneous
to it.
All right, gang, it is 5 minutes past the half hour, so we can get started, and other folks will join or not if they are out there. As always, I want to start us out by looking at where we have gone so far, because our tray is starting to fill up. Chapter 3 is almost finished. So make sure I've got the right section in view. Yes, so I have not, by full disclosure, I spent the most of the last 2 weeks in my studio time trying to prep for the upcoming shows that I'm doing, because my first show is next weekend. So I have not cleaned up all of the stuff from the last time. And I also haven't finished my triangle redo and my emerald redo. So this is our rough piece that we were working with. Again, just a matter of shaping the bezel the way you want to fit the lines of the stone. And then we did prongs added on to an existing step bezel. As a reminder, we took the step bezel down a little bit. It doesn't need to be as high. Oops, I'm not in frame. It doesn't need to be as high up the stone when we're adding the extra support of the prongs. So that was just a nice, easy add-on. I used half round wire on that version, but you can use square wire, you can use pattern wire, you can use round wire. If you do round wire, unlike what we did with the half round, you would want to put a little channel in, filed in, to let the round wire set in and give it a little more surface area to be soldered in place. But with the half round, it's nice and straightforward. It's just flush up against your wall. We then did heavy wall tubing and just did a drilled in setting. And then I cannot for the life of me find it. I'm betting it's still in my tumbler. We did one where we did nested tubing. So it would look exactly like this from the surface. If we hadn't filed down the bottom from the back, we would be able to see the 2 layers as opposed to the solid tubing that we're using. But in this version of it, it's literally just making sure that your 2 layers of tubing are firmly attached, so that it's not a loose fit for those 2. You specifically need to buy nested tubing. And then last but not least, this one I did do a little extra work on after session. This was the double tube setting, and I'm going to actually show what it'll look like with the stones in place. All I did was I added I had a scrap of beaded wire, and I added some connection components. Oops, that's not fitted in yet. Hang on a sec. Come on. One of these fits one way and one of them fits the other, so I may have them in the opposite tubes. Bear with me.
Don't forget, last time they stayed in and you had to take it out.
Yeah, so I think I've got them backwards. I think I just have the wrong ones in.
I think you need to pin yourself.
Oh, you're right. Thank you for that reminder, which I did not get to at the beginning of last time. Spotlight for everyone. That'll make it better. So what I did was I added a little detailed beading wire and then connector points so that this can work as a bail of some kind. And It's not going to stay very well without this. So I'll see if I can hold it in place. Yep. So ultimately it's going to fit in there when I am not working with teeny tiny things and trying to hold them in place. That is not focusing well, is it? Let's see. Let me go over to the other camera, the better camera. So
yeah, that's
bullet
nice.
and bullet, and a little bit of detail to add a bit of bling to it, and that adds some decorative element. Okay,
Yeah,
so that
true.
one was done with tubing, and then we put a round wire in the middle as the stopper. If we were doing a faceted stone on either end, we would have to remember that we can't just get away with a flat wire. We need a piece of tubing or sheet that fits in there that gives us room for the coulettes to not bump up against each other on the inside if we were to do that. But in this case, stone, so it can be just a jump ring sized connection in the middle. And you can sort of see it down in the tube there where it shows. That's the backup that connects everything. Okay, so fun little extra details that you can add. And again, you can set cabs in that setting. You can set bullets. You can set pretty much any kind of, just knowing that you have to make sure that they don't bump if they're connecting, if they have pointy ends that you've stuffed in there. Another fun thing to do with that one is upside down two round faceted stones so that the points are heading out, and then again you can just use the round interior because it's not going to butt up against itself. That is, I think, everything we got to last time. Any questions about any of the settings we've done thus far before we jump into today's?
I have a question. I know that with the same, what you were just showing us right now, you had mentioned sawing in a little bit. So something about not letting any water get in there. I was looking at my notes. So you put a ring in the middle.
You do. I think you're talking about the next settings that we're doing, where John says specifically that it's one where he uses epoxy in it to keep it from getting water inside. So the cup, he doesn't want water to build up in the cup that we're about to do. So he puts a drop of epoxy in it before he goes any further and sets it.
What you were just doing right now, you'll do that?
You could put epoxy in there too. I'm not a huge fan of epoxy unless you have to, in which case you use it. Like I use it on pearls and almost nothing else. But in here, it really depends on how far up the stone my setting is able to go. Is it going far enough that it goes past the curve and will hold? If it's not going to do that, you're going to need to put a little glue in there as backup. I just always worry, people are not very careful with their jewelry, and I worry that they'll, go in a chlorinated pool or whatever, or some kind of chemical situation that'll eat away at the whatever glue you're using. So choose carefully. John lists a couple that he likes, and I got some of the 2-part epoxy. I tend to use a 1-part that is recommended by museums that I am blanking on the name of, but we'll dig up and post it when we get to that setting. Which, by the way, not next session, but the session after is going to be pretty much setting, all day setting, because we'll be at the end of chapter 3 and we'll be doing a lot of catch up on it. For that session, I plan on bringing out an array of different tools and an array of different setting materials, because in the book, we talk about using jet set and or friendly plastic, and we talk about using the plaster of Paris and the brown stuff that melts. I'm blanking on words today. It's been a long day. So I'm gonna set stones up in a variety of combinations and show you the differences and show you some of the both manual and less manual tools that can be used for setting. So I finally picked myself up a setting ball, and I am loving it already. And Also, I use my my micromotor and hammer handpiece when I have heavy walled bezels. Plus, we'll use some of the tools we made in earlier sections. So, any other questions before I jump on ahead? And I realize I'm not seeing my chat, so I need to pop that up.
So did you get the GR system?
No, I wish
For
I
the
could
ball?
afford that. No, it's one of the reasons I haven't gotten a setting ball is because that thing is so bloody expensive that I
Yeah.
couldn't bring myself to without having tried one out. I actually found one for 85 bucks. That's a cheap knockoff ball that for me, it's good enough for now. If at some point I were to take up engraving, I might go a little more high tech. But I got one on Amazon that is just, I wanted to play around, but I didn't want to spend whatever it is, $300 for a GRS ball.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I can't see myself doing it.
Yeah.
Not now.
any other questions about the various settings we've done thus far? Okay, I will start then. We're gonna be starting on page 78 in the book, if you are following along at home, in the what he's calling cup bezels, which confuses the heck out of me. And we are going to do two different versions of the same essential bezel. I'm going to be using another one of these black bullets that I've got because I don't have a whole lot of tall stones. I don't tend to use tall stones. You could do a regular height cabochon in this setting. You can also do any of the taller stones. And the two versions that he does, one is setting it down inside the cup with something for it to rest on. And the other is building a traditional wall and setting that inside the cup on which to hang it. So I've been playing around with version 1 a fair amount. I've tried a few different versions of it this past couple weeks. And I have to say that we're once again up against something that I'm not sure the directions are as clear as they could be on this particular setting. So I want to point out to you on the right-hand side of page 78, there is on the second paragraph down, it starts out with make a wire bearing with an outside diameter that is the same as the outside diameter of the stone. So it is not that you are getting the size that wraps around the stone. It is the size that the base is. So that's an important note. And actually, when I was playing with it, the smaller your stone, you may actually even have to make it a little undersized in order to get it to fit right. So he's not looking for you to wrap the stone. He's looking for you to make one that is exactly like a little pizza tray that the stone can set on with nothing hanging over the edges. And so that's an important clarification. If you try to make it bigger and make it the outside, literally the outside diameter, you're going to have a ring, the inner diameter of which is outside the stone, and you need it to be resting properly there in order to, because if you envision this, we're going to be closing up whatever is above that ring to hold the stone in place once we're done. So if it's too wide, you're never going to get the stone closed in because you're going to be reaching across the chasm that's created by that stone. So that's an important piece. And the approximately, just the end of the paragraph above it, he's talking about it being approximately 2 to 2.5 millimeters down inside of the cup. That one is going to be very dependent on the shape of your stone. Again, our goal is, where does the curve start? We need to be able to catch the start of the curve when we push in order to hold our stone in place. So if you have a very, very upright stone, he may be counting on the glue more than I would, but it's just, there's nothing to grab onto if you don't, if it's not glued in, frankly. So if you have a stone that goes straight up and over, you may need to consider being a little bit deeper into the cup than 2 to 2.5. So basically, I'm just saying that's a great starting point, but measure what makes sense to you once you've done some of these relative to your shape and size of stone. It's not quite one size fits all on that setting.
I'm sorry, where are you talking? What page?
To the very first chat of the first paragraph, the end of the first paragraph of the second column.
What
where
page
he
though?
ends with, whereas the final sentence of that is, at this point, the stone should fit approximately 2 to 2.5 millimeters down inside the cup.
Page
and I-
79?
Pardon?
What page is it?
On
79?
page 78. 78.
Okay,
I'm stepping up from the first note I gave you by a sentence, 2 sentences.
okay. Thank you.
And what I've really discovered is that a lot of this is, it's like he practiced, or he wrote this up around a specific stone that he was using a lot of the same size. This is a finickier measurement proportions than I thought it was going to be, given the design of the setting. So we'll play through some of that frustration today. Starting with, I'm going to be using 24 gauge. And the fun thing about these cups is that you can do patterns on the outside. It is going to take a little bit of a beating because we're going to be putting it down into the curves of our dapping tools. But I'm going to start out with a basic piece of pattern wire. And I am going to determine the outer diameter of the stone that I'm setting at the base. And on page 78, column 1, he's having us do 1.5 times the diameter of the stone, which the smaller you get, the harder that's going to be. So I've got 6.12. I'm going to go to 9.2 as a result and find my closest sized hole, which should be. So I'm going to go this size cup or this size dap and punch out a couple of those. And what I found is the smaller you're setting this, the harder it is to get just the size you need to get both a dome and enough height to get his requisite 2.5 millimeters that he's suggesting deep. So that's part of the challenge there. Get this out of the way. And I had my brass mallet. Where is it? There we go. Bear with me, loud noise coming. Okay, so I've got my dapped disc and I'm going to pop it into any reasonably sized spot in my doming that I can start with. So took me a long time to realize, and I don't even remember which of my many instructors through the years taught me, you do not want to do steel on steel if you can help it. 1, it risks breaking your tools, and 2, it's much harsher on any pattern you've got on it or what have you. So I have both a wooden dap and a steel dap, and I try to actually, if I'm using metal dapping tools, I try to use the wood base, except I may not have a small enough spot on my wood. I really need to find a nice wood one that has better daps, better depths of daps for me. And I'm just going to start curvature to get it going. Yeah, definitely. This is too small for me to do. It's too small for me to do when I drop it and can't figure out where I dropped it. That's part of the fun. There it is. So it's too small of a dap for me to manage my wood one. So I'm going to go to my smaller dap. And then if possible, I'm going to switch to a wood punch of some kind just to be less aggressive on the pattern. It's not always possible to have perfect fits for everything, but whatever you can do to be less damaging to that pattern. So I'm starting to get the curve, and I'm going to need to move pretty quickly into regular steel daps and just know that it may bang up that pattern because I can't get deep enough with the wood. Can you guys still see that on screen? Oh, I got to scoot up a bit. Pardon me. I'm going to move on you so you can keep watching this. And one of the things that's a little challenging on this is that we really need a full cup to come up. So we can't just make a nice curve. We need it to come up into a bowl. And so that's going to take some time, and it's going to take a whole lot of different DAP sizes to get us to, including often getting it stuck in the slots we're trying to put it into. Does it matter how wide the base is of the bullet? It does matter relative to the size that you are making. Is it what that measurement that he says, which is 1.5 times the diameter, is what you're using as the base. So whatever your stone base is, 1.5 times that is where you're starting. If you're gonna err on one side or the other, I would err on being a little bigger than 1.5. Especially if you're working with a small stone. I'm just changing the scale of DAP and gradually working it deeper and deeper and getting it stuck. Soft DAP. Okay, bear with me while I try to figure out how to peel this back out. No, I'm going to wax this a little bit just to give it some ease of moving on to another size. And so one of the reasons I have multiple dapping blocks is because they have different sizes between them. And sometimes it's just better to switch from one block to the other for a half step size. And another thing to consider is sometimes you need to go from an angle to get the curve to hit as deeply as you want. So it's not just a straight down hit. You'll have to work through and balance out, tapping it on the side and then tapping it on the other side and sort of around. But ultimately, you want it to get centered. This is being finicky because it's just the wrong size for that. Bear with me, gang. Just exactly the right size to get stuck. Well, I have a feeling I'm going to be doing a lot of leaning down and picking this little thing up. So we're at about halfway domed. I don't know if you guys can see that, but it's not yet tall enough up. And what I'm looking for is if I were to put two of them together, I'd have a near perfect sphere. So that's how deeply we need to go with these. I'm going to go back into one of my larger spots, see if I can get a little more DAP out of that. And I found that in the scale that we're working here with this tiny little thing, I eventually had to shift from the dapping block as the cup to putting my dapping tools, my punches, in a vise, which I may have to do on this one as well, and using it as sort of a doming over tool instead of just dapping it into the hole here. So let's see what we've got that isn't going to get stuck. I'm not going to go far enough, but we'll see. So again, I'm just using progressively smaller daps. And now I'm really working the sides, trying to use the cup, the interior of the cup to sort of work my way more and more round as I go. And it's decimate. You can see how much my pattern has gone away because I'm using steel on steel. So I only have so much that I can do on the scale I'm working, the tools I have. So what I mean by working side by side, let's see if I can get that in camera, is rather than it being at the bottom of the DAP, I'm using the bottom of the DAP along the edges of the piece I'm trying to dome. So a slightly bigger spot, but by tucking in to the inside, I'm working around to try and get it to curve up a little bit more. And it's getting there, but it's still not truly domed. It wouldn't be round and whole. So I am going to switch over and bring out my little bench vise. And this is going to be, it's going to take a moment to set up. So I just have a cheapo one for little work at the bench that I can attach quickly onto the side. And I will move my camera momentarily once I have it connected so you guys can see this. Bear with me, taking you on a journey. All right, so now I can take one of my small daps, and I like to sort of rest it on whatever is below the support so that when I'm pounding down on things, I can know that it's not going to slip out. Put it in real snug. And now it gets a little tricky because we have to dap a tiny thing. And you may be able to get it to move with a mallet, or you might have to move on to some kind of forming hammer to get a little more movement. You also may want to anneal it if you've gotten this far. I'm getting still enough movement that I don't think I need to yet, but I may in a moment. And all I'm doing is trying to tap it down to get more curvature around the dap. Obviously, tiny is a little harder to get this to happen. So if you can do one bigger scale, you may want to start slightly larger stones than I've got. I just don't happen to have anything larger in a bullet to play around with. I am definitely going to anneal super quick. Helps if I turn on my torch pattern. In my metalsmith days, we wanted to form etched patterns and use thick 2mm flexible rubbery sheet. Oh yeah, but I know what you're talking about. The oh gosh, I have a strip of it, but I haven't used much of it. It's used in hydraulic presses also. Nice. That is a good call to use some rubber sheet between the metal and the pattern stuff. Okay, so we're annealed. We're going to head back to our vise. And I can tell you guys that I like version 2 of this better because this is so fiddly that it takes a lot of patience. I'm going to actually switch over to, since my pattern is already shot, I'm going to switch over to a hammer that'll do a little bit more rapid work on shaping it around. So I'm just, again, trying to get as round a dome as I can. I think I need to switch down one more size smaller on my tool. I'm sort of maxing out. There should always be a little bit of, if you're trying to reshape something, there should always be a little bit of air between what you're hammering and what you're hammering against and the metal. Because if there's no air, then the only thing you're going to do against the metal is stretch the material you're hammering. So if you have a very tight fit, it's not going to move. If you have a little bit of room, you'll hopefully get some movement. Right now, I'm seriously wishing I had a bigger stone for this particular project. I'm starting to get a little bit more dome to it. It's getting a little bit rounder. And I'm going to go back briefly to the dapping tools. and see if I can now get a little bit more cleanup done in one of the slots that I have. Go, that's looking pretty promising. Too big, next size down. Okay, so now we have something that is more half dome shaped. Okay, and it's time to start checking it against the stone itself. Because now we're going to check and see, do we go in that 2 to 2.5 millimeters that he was suggesting. So you can see it's sort of starting to look like a little acorn. And it does sit down into the stone, into the dapped bowl. Right? And I also am checking that I don't have too much gap around the stone, because if you think about it, we're going to have to push all this material onto the stone. So you want to do as much of that work getting it cupped as possible before you get too far and do the next step. I have banged up the edges of this enough that I'm going to do a little sanding and filing to clean it up. Just adding my piece of blue painter's tape to the back because it's so tiny to hold it. That helps me get a little bit of a grip on it. Just like that. And then the fabulous sanding board that John had us work on at the beginning. I bet I don't have water here. I do not. Bear with me a second. Don't get it in the water. And I'm just doing enough to get a flattened surface again. Water and the tape don't mix, of course. And we're looking okay there. All right, so the next thing that we are supposed to do on this setting that John does not go into a whole lot of detail on is that we need to put a little ring that's going to sit at the base of the dome and give us a connection point. Tough break, that is not a name of a product I know. The rubbery material, 1 millimeter thick. All right, well, hang out on chat, guys, and you'll see the name of this product that Deborah used. That sounds like it's worth checking out for putting inside of your DAPs to keep the pattern in place. So John has asked us to now put a ring in, but he doesn't talk to us at all, other than to say that it needs to be the diameter of the base of the stone. He doesn't tell us what gauge we need to use. He doesn't tell us anything else about it. So you get the wisdom of my several attempts at this. Make it really, really thin. Some very small gauge, because you don't want it especially if you're working this small on stones, you don't want it taking up a lot of height in the space. All it's supposed to do is become the little resting platform inside the dome. Okay, so I ended up using a jump ring because I happened to find one that was just the right size of my stone and was a thin gauge. So I'm going to see if I luck out that way. Otherwise, I'll make another one. And I thought, well, why don't I use square wire? Well, no, use round wire in this one, because then the solder creates a sort of a flat surface by the time the solder flows. Let's see what we've got that's small. Small pliers. So that's a little too small. But you do not want your ring to be bigger than the base of the stone. Let's see if that fits. So this is pretty darn perfect for fitting just under the piece. You don't want it hanging out over the edges. And that's what he meant. That's that message, that passage at the top of the second paragraph. Make a wire bearing with an outside diameter that is the same as the outside diameter of the stone, not wrapping around the stone, but sitting directly under it, you don't see it when you look straight down. So I'm going to take this perfectly sized bezel that also by chance happens to be pre-soldered. I didn't plan it that way. It's just the right size. I'm going to hop over to the bench and solder it in place. If you've done a good job of centering your dapping, it should rest fairly flat as is when you set it up. But if it doesn't, you're going to need to manipulate it a little bit while you're working, because you want this to be level, because it's going to be the thing against which your stone rests. So I'm hopping back over to the soldering bench. And I found that on my brick, if I had a little spot that was dug in, I could rest my half dome and get it fairly level that way, and then figure out what I needed to do to adjust the jump ring inside. If I didn't have a pre-made jump ring, I would be just making it out of probably 20 gauge wire, and because it's small, again, it'll depend on the scale of your piece. And then I would have soldered it in a ring, made sure it was nice and round, and then soldered it into place. So I'm gonna flux this up. And because I'm fluxing it, I'm also going to need to check that it doesn't go out of true, because it may jump around with the moisture burning off. So just keep an eye on it as you're heating it that first time. But again, if you've got a nice round setting, if you've done a good job on making the whole dome, it'll be in pretty ideal space for you. Okay, and then I'm using hard solder. And in this case, I'm just putting it along the outer wall, between the wall and the dome, between the wall and the ring that I put in. Making sure that I'm not moving it out of place again. Except I did, because I bumped it. And it's just a quick little solder to get that in there. That is definitely not even anymore. Hold on a sec. Push that down a little bit. Okay. And the other thing that I found was, if I'm working this tiny, I'm probably just going to hop over and put some kind of, if I know I'm going to use it as a connector, I'm going to do it all in one session. I will put a little half round jump ring or something on the top of it. Depends on what I'm going to do with it. You could do it later, but there's not much more to this setting, so I may as well set one up. So I've just got a tiny little jump ring. If you can, you eyeball it for centering. If you can't, pause, cool it off, mark it, and then position your jump rings accordingly. That flowing where I needed to. Oh, goodness. So small, it doesn't even stay in the tweezers. All right, so what I've done is an only okay job of centering after all of that. My inner jump ring, so I may have to do a little filing down and touch up on that. But I've made the base ring that on which the stone will set. So I'm going to pop that in the pickle, and we'll take a look at it when it's clean and talk about any questions you might have on those steps. Anyone?
Okay. Yeah, I do. So you solder two things at the same time?
Not at the same time. I soldered the inner ring, and then I soldered the jump ring on top of it as a second step. I just didn't pause and pickle and everything between,
Okay.
because it was a quick and dirty, like just plop something on there. I'll do that with earring backs too, that kind of thing. If I've just set on a setting, it's totally okay to pause, clean it off, make your measurements, and be much more precise. I just have a fairly decent eye for centering. So in this case, I just figured I'd plop it on there. An instinct on this one, by the way, might be to add decorative elements around the outer edge of it. Remember, you need that outer edge to be loose enough that you don't want things in the way. You're going to have to put pressure on it when you're setting the stone to bend the top of the dome in. So don't necessarily want that decorative element on the outside, because that'll just make it thicker. You could maybe add some prong detail or something like that, or if you're working larger scale, you could do some of the cutaway that we talked about in the rough setting, so that it gives you a little bit easier clench in there. But you may want to play around with a few before you start getting too detailed on it. You could put like a nice little ring of beaded wire at the top of the dome, maybe something along those lines. Or a little gold element around it would be nice. But yeah, play with a few of the basics before. This one is a little more challenging than it looks like it should be for 3 tiny little parts.
It's so small.
It's fiddly, yeah. And I do want to practice. I want to get some bigger bullets and practice again with bigger daps, because that may change my take on this one. But I still like the version that we're about to do a little bit better for both development and resulting look. Any questions on it from anyone else? Did I miss anything in chat? Deborah, I got your answer about I saw your answer about the pattern. Oh, come on, chat. It's not behaving well. Bear with me a sec, guys. My Zoom is delaying. Okay. So I think I got all the questions in there. So that's pretty much all there is to version 1. Version 2 does not have the criticality that version 1 did of getting a full dome. Like you're not going to have success, in my opinion, with that model we just did if you don't get a really, really bowl-shaped start. But our next version has a little more leeway, because what's going to actually hold the stone is a traditional bezel wall. So I'm going to use the exact same stone and make the setting for that as well. And in this case, I can make any size that I want of dome, because what it becomes is a purely decorative element. It's not going to hold the stone itself. So let me see if I happen to have something close to the size already made that I can just quickly dap up. So again, probably the minimum that you want is that 1.5 times the diameter of the stone. So I'll take this guy and do a quick dap, but I'm not going to go into the same detail that I did on the other one, because in this case, I just need curvature to make it look nice rather than curvature to hold it in place. Just a bigger dap than that. Slightly smaller dap. So I could probably even stop there. It's a little mushroom cappy. Oops, I'm on the wrong screen for you guys, sorry. So all I'm doing is dapping another dap. I'm just not going as deep a curve as I did. And I'm gonna go a little deeper than that because it's, what I find is if it's too shallow of a dap, it feels a little bit like a hat to me in this style, or like a mushroom top. So I want enough curvature to make it interesting. I don't have to get that full half of a sphere dome. So that's looking okay. Let's see. My judgment call on this one is what's it going to look like when it has a stone inside of it. And that's looking okay to me. So then once I have a dap that I'm going to work in, the domed piece that I'm going to work in, then I'm just making a traditional basic bezel wall, right? I'm making a loop around it. You could even do this, if you use fine silver bezel wire, you could do this with that. In this case, because we've sort of committed per John's preferences in the book to using sterling silver, I'm just going to take a strip of 24 gauge. I wish I was working in 24 karat. Just to make a strip of 24 gauge. And I have to think again, as with any stone, where does my curve start? Right. And so I need probably, let me get my calipers, lighters. I need to probably go about a quarter to a third of the way up the stone before this particular stone starts to curve. Again, John's recommending that we use epoxy in this particular style of setting. So you may not have to be as exacting as long as you've got enough material to hold the epoxy to hold the stone. But if you're truly looking to have the metal be what holds the stone in place, it needs to hit that same kind of curve consideration you would in any other bezel setting. Just throwing together a little round setting. I'm going to use pliers at this point to get my shape, and then I'll touch it up from there. Just give myself a little bit of a round. Way too big still. Tighter. I really need to find a pair of miniatures of the half round pliers. It's one that I haven't seen. Got rounds, I've got flats, got needle nose. Nobody makes, that I've seen, baby versions of half round pliers. Just gonna mark this and rough cut it, and then I'll trim it close again. And so the downside of this style is that it hides a little bit more of the stone, but the upside is it's a much faster setting, and I personally find it visually more interesting than the curve grab of the stone. I like that there's a little material that looks like a wall. But each design has its own reason for being, and you'll have to choose what looks best with your stones. When in doubt, make this a little small and you'll stretch it using the techniques we learned earlier in the chapter. More off of that. Okay, over to the bench. And hard solder, just to close up our loop. And these are all in the book, are all designed around round stones until we get to the tongue setting. I mean, I suppose if you have the dapping tools and the patience to get yourself something that's domed to follow the shape of another stone, you could construct a sort of an equivalent top hang for almost any shape. It's just a matter of the proportions of the setting. And getting your angle. So you'd have some challenges when you make it angled, getting the whatever frame you're putting in shaped and filed down at the curves so that you can get a nice clean fit. At this point, I'm just rounding it up after having soldered it. And I'll check my fit. Something I always have to remind myself is to check my fit when I put it in from the top, because it's super easy to do all of your work and just put the piece down and be like, oh yeah, it fits. And then you realize that you've only got it fitting one direction. So this is a little bit snug, so I need to stretch it out, but not much. And if you haven't seen me doing this, I realize I probably haven't articulated this well. If you need to stretch something a little bit on a bezel or something like that, and you have a good mandrel for it, a good steel mandrel for it, this needs the steel in order to help stretch. If you put this up carefully against a blunt steel platform of some kind, and you hammer downward and just rotate around, that will be a gentle stretch as it pushes down the line. So I'm upside down so that the force of my blow is forcing it further up. It's sometimes a little easier to control going that way. You still have to remember to flip your piece and do it from both directions, just like you would if you were hammering straight onto the mandrel to size it up. But I'm just doing a couple quick taps around and checking my sizing. And we are now looking, no, I want to stretch that one more tiny stretch. Still not quite hitting. So again, I'm just upside down, couple quick taps. It stretches faster than you think, especially if you're using thin gauge metal. There we go. Okay. Oops, I may have stretched it too big. Yep, I did. It's really tiny amounts, so I'm going to have to take this apart and resolder it again. Zip off. Again, this is a place where I might consider using a pattern wall. I'd be careful to make sure that my pattern met up well at the seam, because if I'm trying to make it a decorative element, I want it to flow all the way around. But the walls of these bezels can add a little bit of bling to your piece just by putting some nice texture on it. Okay, see if that split the difference enough. Yeah, now we're looking good. Okay, so I've got my, oops, I'm still not on the right camera. I've got my ring wall, which again, if I were just making a plain old bezel at this point, I'd put a back plate on it. The only thing we're changing on this is that we're going to be putting it in a curve. So this is another spot where John doesn't do a whole lot of talking about the details. We're now on page 79 on the left-hand side in the section where he says the alternate cup bezel construction is well suited to the setting of the bullets or other high profile. Begins with a basic bezel, dapped and put into the slightly larger diameter disc. So this becomes the bearing wall. It sort of limits where it's going on a cabochon. However, what he doesn't talk about here that he has talked about in other areas, I think, is that you're hitting against a curve. So one thing that you're going to want to do, it's kind of the inverse of where we filed when we were nesting two into each other. So we need to put a little bit of an outside file on whatever's going to land down into the curve of this. We also want to make sure before we do that, that we've got a good flat surface. So I'm again just going to quickly clean up my surfaces with a little sanding. Might as well get both sides while I'm at it. And then I'm going to pick one side. First, I'm going to make sure I'm re-rounded again because I'm a little off round from that soldering. But I'm not going to size it anymore. I'm just going to round it out. Okay, so I'm going to pick a side, and I'm just using my barrette file, which is my favorite of all time. And on one edge on the outside, I'm just putting a little tiny bit of a bevel all the way around. Just to give that little spot where it's going to rest down into this curvature of the DAP, of the dome rather. And that'll let the solder connect a little more than it would if I just left it squared up. So that side is what's going to fit down into my cup. Okay, seeing what that looks like. So, beveled edge resting inside of the curvature. Right, we're going to pop back over and solder that. Again, I like to put it into a little divot in my material that'll help stabilize it a bit. In this case, I'm going to get smart and actually dip the inner piece in the flux to try and get it set up, making sure I've got the piece centered. It's tricky on the curves because they want to move around. And as before, the flux may bubble and cause it to try to move out. If you're of an age like me where you were a watcher of Friends, I call this the Joey Tribbiani move, where you just sneak up on it with your heat to try and keep it from bubbling. How you doing? So it's just kind of brushing towards it until it bubbles off, and that's a little less likely to move out of place. And again, I always like that the flux tells me what the temperature is beneath it. White and crispy, it's just getting dried out. And then when it starts to go to the clear to red look, reddish clear, that's when it's getting up to temperature. This is a little trickier because I've got such a tight fit to get my solder in place. But I'm tucking it between the wall and the rim. And I may do a little touch up inside and put extra solder just up against where it meets to make sure I have a really good fit, but it's a little harder to position that and get it to flow. Yeah, it wants to go up and inside, and I don't want it to. go. So what I'm looking for is that there's a little ring of solder all the way around on the inside where the dome meets the wall. Okay. And again, I've got a little bit off center on that. So I think I'm going to try to get it to reposition and try to get it to settle a little better than it has. Which may or may not be possible, but we're going to try. There we go. So what I did to adjust it was I got it flowing and had the tweezers ready to just gently nudge down on the side that was lifting up. And that makes me a lot happier for the positioning of it. Still not perfect, but I'll do a little sanding to get it there. As with the other one, if I'm not doing anything else to it, I could put my half round or whatever I'm using for a connector on. So I'll do that now. And then by doing both of these for the same stone, we'll be able to take a look at visually what they're going to each do when we set them. Switch over to a medium solder so that doesn't flow as quick. Okay, so I've got my little mushroom cap and a little bit of a lip over from the interior loop and off to the pickle for that one. Questions on how that one was different, on anything, choices of stones?
I have a question, Rachel.
Sure.
And I know some people don't like it, and it's not my preference, but would it be easier to maybe use paste solder when you have to sit the thing inside, because it doesn't bubble as much and it kind of sticks it in there?
So the answer is, it may be for you, it may be for other people, it may not be. Like it's
Right,
for some
okay.
people, paste solder is just horrible to manipulate.
I know, and I rarely use it, but once in a while. It just
So
seems-
good paste solders are self-fluxing, which is part of
Right.
why you're getting that effect of it helping hold in place.
Yeah.
I just find that I way over solder when I use paste solder. I just use tons and I shouldn't. I can't get just tiny bits of it in place. But absolutely, the answer is, if it works for you, by all means, use it.
Okay.
And try it. You know, maybe make a pair of them at the same time and do one of your soldering jobs with chip solder or wire solder, whatever your preference is, and another by putting it into place. It'd be a great exercise to test.
Okay.
I just avoid this stuff at all costs.
Yeah,
Every time I do, it's just blobbing everywhere for me. I just don't control it well. Maybe
I
there's
know, but
somebody out
I've
there who
got
can
some
teach me how
sitting
to use it better.
around. I have some sitting around, so I may just play with that a little bit.
Yeah.
You know.
It's also ridiculously expensive relative to other solders. So
Yeah, well, I've had it for a long time, and
Yeah.
but you know, we'll try. I'll
Yeah.
let you know.
Good. Any other questions on those? Okay. So I'm going to let them pickle for a bit so that we have both of them, and then we'll take a peek at what they each visually look like with the itty bitty little bullet stone that I'm holding on to for dear life, because I have only 3 of them all told. And in the meantime, let's talk about tongue type bezel. Nancy, if you use epoxy, make sure you set the bezel right away. Yes. Did you learn that the hard way, Nancy? And don't let your fingers glue together. That's the other thing. Yes. So epoxy, most epoxy, it's not literally right away, but most epoxy recommends you mix it, put it in place, and wait, depending on the type of epoxy, a matter of a few seconds to sometimes a minute to give it a little bit of time to get tacky before you put anything into it. But after that, it's not moving again. If you don't get it to that tacky state, sometimes it'll shift on you as you're putting it in place. But yeah, epoxy has special challenges, and you need to have patience and follow the directions on your type of epoxy for how long you leave it without touching it. That's another hard lesson I've learned is, but it looks ready. It feels ready. Oh, there goes the pearl. Darn. So yeah, lots and lots of nuance with that. So tongue settings. I don't know why, but I associate a tongue cut stone with like 1980s, early 90s jewelry, but I guess they're getting popular again. So we're seeing more of them. Oh, I meant to put my bullet on the larger bullet that I had. I do have one other bullet stone. Oh, well, we'll do it another time. So the tongue setting that he describes in this is essentially what we've just built, except that our challenge is it doesn't have a round cap. So this is where we start on that idea of what do we have to do for filing corners and edges, or not so much corners as the ends of the bezel wall. And he's suggesting that this is essentially that same make an outer bezel, but he doesn't go into any detail for us about how to make the curved part of the tongue. So for me, what I said was, well, you know, it's roughly an oval on the tongue setting that I'm doing. It's got sort of a little squared off oval. I'll pull out this stone so you guys can see it. It really looks like a tongue. It's a tongue all the way around, but it has a slightly oval-ish but squared off shape. I don't happen to have an oval punch. They're just too bloody expensive, or I'd have every punch shape known to man. But I do have a round shape and a rolling mill. So if I want to make an oval real quick, I'm going to take a heavier gauge metal in round and roll it out in the rolling mill, making sure that I'm going the same direction every time I roll. Let's see if I've got something that's close. So I'm going to start with something that's close to the size of the overall back plate, but then I'm going to hop over to my rolling mill, which I don't currently have a camera set up, but hang on a sec. 30 seconds and I will have one. Just have to adjust the available cameras. And momentarily. Okay, let me switch over to that camera and see if, are you guys seeing a really distorted view of the mill? Or does that look normal to you guys?
It's distorted.
It's
Distorted. Hang on. My cameras occasionally decide that they don't like this tool, so I may have to log out and back on. Bear with me while it reboots. Oh, come on, camera. Is that looking a little bit better?
It's better.
Okay, so all I'm doing is making sure that I mark with my marker that I failed to pick up. I'm marking the direction I'm going through on my round. Okay. And then I'm just gonna roll it with a tightened down mill, not too tight, but just enough to squish it a little bit in that direction. Give myself an oval shape. Ooh, this one came out almost exactly the shape I want. Okay,
Cool.
sometimes it'll take more than one pass, but nice and even, as long as your rolling mill is well aligned and it's fairly even, you've got a good, quick way to make yourself an oval.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, the rolling mill has some powers that we don't use often enough. All right, so, but I have also in the course of that work hardened this, so I'm gonna anneal it really quickly. And then I need to figure out how am I gonna get some kind of a dome into it. So with the doming, I can start in my, except I don't want to melt it because I'm paying attention to other things. I can start in my regular dapping block, but then I may have to work on a piece of wood or something if I don't have an oval wood dap. You can get oval daps. And I have one, I just cannot for the life of me find it right now. So I'm gonna have to improvise. And I'm gonna start this curve in the regular dapping blocks. Get some stuff out of my way, I'm a little crowded here. So I'm gonna start in a very big dap on this one. And just do some basic adding in of an initial curve. And the nice thing about using this second technique, which is what we're essentially using when we do this, is that we can pause, because this doesn't have to be part of the setting the way that it did in Model 1, we can do this to whatever directionality and dimensionality looks good, like, because we're going to be building a regular frame below it, right? So I can do a gentle dap, or I can decide that I want something a little more curved and get in there into a deeper slot. It's gonna fit a little bit. I need a smaller one. And then when I start to get too curved, it starts to look a little crazy for this particular shape because it's curving all one direction mostly. There's only a little bit of left-right curve on the piece. I got some because I'm working in a wide dap, but if I want to get a little more curvature into that so that it's going a little bit more around the piece, then I have to start getting creative and either work on, if I have an oval dap, work on an oval dap, or where did I put my block of wood that I pulled out for this very purpose? You're going to take a piece of 2x4, there it is, put it away. Piece of 2x4 of a decent wood, pine or something like that. Doesn't have to be terribly hard, but it can be. And hammer in your own oval. And this is just a matter of dapping it in, or of punching it in with a good forming hammer, which I cannot find right this instant because it's probably hidden on my shelves. But you can even probably do it with a ball peen and make your own roughly oval shape. So John had us do these wood blocks for some of our spoon forming and stuff like that. And then it can go in your vise. And as long as you have a bit of a curve there, you can start to work your metal into the shape of the side curves that you're looking for. So there you go. So my trick is that I'm trying to get a little bit more curvature here and here. And so I'm going to work with forming hammer that I've managed to put down. I just didn't manage to pick it up. So all different sorts of hammers can do the trick for this. I'm just trying to get a little more curve on the edges. I'm getting out of my dapping tool. I'm going to work both sides a little bit. And I could also pull out, I have a channel dap that I can use to get a little bit more left-right dap. So I could do some work in here, somewhere in there, and try to get it down along the lines a little bit more. So whatever tools you have to hand to get your shape, and you can see I'm starting to get more side to side out of this. I just need to get it a little more even. To put curvature in to make it interesting for the top of the setting. But by putting this two-directional curvature in, we're also creating a little bit of a challenge for ourselves, because that's where we have to figure out how we're going to get the frame that we're about to build of our standard bezel wall to follow that curve. And that's where this can become quite frustrating on these settings. But now let's take a peek, and it becomes a lot more interesting as soon as I've got downward curve than if I just had the flat side to side and the domed only on the ends, right? So I get a little bit more unusual setting shape. And I could play around with this to my heart's content. I'm going to actually try to just even it out a little bit and then use what I've got here for a side, for a shape. And best situation is you can always come back and trim away the outer edge if you don't like how it looks once you've got it in place. It's really the frame that we're building that's going to hold the piece more than anything else. So if I really, really hate how my cap looks once I've got it fully built, I'll cut extra away, and I've still got the nice curvature at the top of it. Okay, so I think that's looking like a fairly good starting point. I would probably take a lot more time if I were doing this for a production piece to be really, really happy with the shape. But since I don't have something that I'm designing this for, it's really just the exercise of building right now. I'm going to stick with what I've got for shape. This one, again, we're starting with a basic bezel, although on a tongue, depending on the cut again, that whole rule of 1/3 to 1/4 would put us like somewhere in here. And that's hiding an awful lot of a nice stone. So again, consider, where does the curve really start? I need to be above that point. So I'm going to try and get away with doing just a little bit right up till I start seeing actual curvature. I'm going to go about that thick. And then a portion of it is going to be hidden down in the curve of the setting. So for this one, again, I'm going with a basic 24 gauge strip. This would be a great place to do decorative because it adds, again, that nice elegance to the element that's hanging. Usually these are going to be hanging down from something. Not always, but it could be a dangle earring, or it could be a bottom piece of a multi-part pendant or something like that. And shaping this, it's whatever you normally do for shaping. I tend to start these on the long side of the stone and then find my bends and start putting them in with pliers and finger pressure to get my curvature. Keep in mind that a lot of times the tongues will have a fairly quick getting skinnier as you go up. So this kind of setting may also need some careful cutting away, making the jagged edges like we did for the crystal piece, or depends on the cut of your stone, really. So I'm mostly just doing a rough fit to begin. Getting the excess material out of the way. And a lot of this kind of shaping I do sort of by instinct around what shape pliers to use, what follows the form, and then doing small adjustments once I've got it done. So in this case, I can see that I need less material at the ends than I planned for. So I'm going to trim even more away. Yeah, a fair amount of excess on this right now. And my favorite set of pliers for when I have really small work, I think I got them at Joann's or Michael's, these baby wire wrapping pliers. Again, they don't have 1.5 round or I'd be in heaven. But these can get you into places that your other pliers can't for small bezel settings. So it's literally the only thing I ever use them for is this tiny scale adjustment work. But they're a nice little handy set, and I think they were, you know, $10 for a set of them. It's make sure I'm not oversized still. I'm going to actually end up having to stretch this a little bit, but it's really, really close. So I'm going to solder. Better again, too small than too big.
Rachel, are the
Yeah.
sides of the cab, are they kind of rounded or are they kind of squared?
So I don't know if you can see, they have both a round portion and a squared off portion on this particular stone. One side is a little bit, oops, I'm not in camera, so that's not going to help you at all. Goodness. There we go. So this one has rounded and squared off, but one side is more rounded on this particular stone than the other. So it's, you got to work with what you got. Not all tongues are going to be that way. I've seen tongues that come to a very sort of almost, if you were to look at this profile, it would almost be a marquee shape. And I've seen ones that have a nice round, so it's like an oval shape at the end of it.
Yeah, that's how I did mine. I capped mine to be more oval.
Yeah. Again, it's, you work with what you get. So if you like the stone.
Hey, yeah, I'd never seen one like that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, I bought them because I had never set tongue setting before. And I wanted to play around with it, and they were the right price for what I wanted to practice on. Whoops, that is not closed well though. Let me get this better set. And frankly, they're hard to find. Like I said, I think I saw a lot more of them 20 years ago.
Gosh, I better start making them and putting them back out on the market again.
Yeah. Although the other thing is it could be regional, like it might be more found in Southwestern jewelry. I don't know. It's
Well,
not
you're seeing there's a big rise and has been for about the last year in Southwestern jewelry. You know, there's a big controversy with calling it Native American jewelry, unless you're a Native American person.
Yeah.
So I go with the Southwestern style jewelry.
Yeah.
And there's a big rise in that type of jewelry. And yes, that's why they're probably coming back out on the market.
Yeah, but what year did John put out this book? So he was like 1984, right? Something thereabouts.
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
so
I bought it when it first came out.
yeah, me too. Well, shortly thereafter. I guess I wasn't quite working on jewelry at this scale then. So yeah, I think, you know, all things old are new again is what it comes down to.
Yep, it just cycles back around.
Mm-hmm. Although if we could get rid of Larimar forever, It's one of my least favorite stones ever.
Oh, and
No
it's
offense
even,
to anybody
it's
who
even
loves
worse
grandma.
to cabot.
Is it?
Okay, it's worse to cabot
Yeah.
than it is to set it. Okay.
I just
Yeah.
find it doesn't look like real stone to me. It looks plastic.
Yeah, and then you get into a lot of the controversies too, of the man-made stones. Like you see a lot of the composite stones and stuff like that. But they're
Yeah.
really very beautiful. I mean, they really are.
Yeah.
And so long as you're up front with telling somebody that you're selling them to what this is,
Yep.
it's their choice because they're gorgeous stones. Well, now I'm seeing a whole lot of epoxy coming out too, colored epoxy.
Yeah.
Seen a lot of that coming out now.
And Fordite is taking off gangbusters, which I would have sworn was never going to happen.
Oh yeah, now you've got Fordite, you've got Jeepite, you've got Kenwoodite, you've got it all. I mean, it's from every place.
And what's
now
the
that-
skateboard? The skateboards are being made into stones
Yep,
too?
you've got that. Then you've also got that paint. Oh gosh, I've made some of those cabs too. I've made all of those cabs. I can't
Isn't that
remember.
the Fordite?
Oh yeah, Fordite is nasty, it's dirty, and it stinks. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. I'm a big proportion that I tell everybody out there up front, wear a mask. I don't care what your cabin. You
Yep.
wear a ventilator mask,
Yeah.
especially when you're messing with stuff like that,
I believe it.
because it is nasty.
Okay, so my stone is fitting when I put it in from the back, but as we know, it has to fit from up top. So I got to do a little stretching. Because it's so nominal, I'm trying to do it with half round pliers with the squeeze effect. If I get impatient with that, I'll switch to the round. But I find that as soon as I switch to the round ones, I'm overstretching. So I like to do this first. As a reminder, this is what we did in our first sets of bezels, where we're just stretching it out a little bit at a time from both sides. In this case, there's definitely a directionality to this stone, so I got to be careful that I put it in consistently the same direction. And there's a little bit of a niche, of a notch where it wants to fit in. So close, but not quite stretched enough.
Don't forget to make a mark.
Yeah, you have got it right. I got to do a little sanding and filing before I get to that, because I'm still rough on the top and bottom of it. Yeah, nothing says frustrating like putting down a bunch of really beautifully soldered things to realize that they're upside down. Your soldering is always the best when it's upside down, is what I've found. There we go. That's a nice fit. Okay, let me sand this a brief amount, a little bit of sanding. And so what I haven't discovered is any other ways to set tongue settings than this. Has anybody ever seen anything tongue based that's like, I don't know if I'd ever see a prong set. It's a little tall for that, but any other kinds of settings you've seen?
No.
No?
No, when I set the horn coral, I set a horn coral piece, and it was a tongue.
Yeah.
And it was really kind of a cross between a tongue and a bullet, because they come to a point.
Yeah.
And I used that setting that you did last.
Okay.
The last type of setting you did.
Yep.
Before this one, I used that one, and it turned out good. It really did turn out good. I liked it. It was interesting, and I made the earrings to match it. It was because it was an interesting material. That was part of what I liked. But I didn't put a high dome on it.
I don't know that I've ever heard the term horned pearl. Is that
horn coral? I'm sorry.
coral?
Horn coral.
Ah, coral. Yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Wow.
It looks. If I knew exactly where it was on the top of my head, I'd go get it for you. I'll post it on the site so y'all can see it.
And so this, by the way, this setting that we're doing right now is the exact same setting we did on the last piece. It's just done on a not round, not, you know, we've chosen not to put it in a domed round. We're putting it in something that's more aligned with its tongue shape instead. So this is the same technique as a moment ago. There we go. There's my top. And as Carmen reminded me, I want to always make sure I've marked the top. Probably a better pen than that. Let's do it in nice bright pink. All right, so our next challenge that makes this a little different than the doming, our doming one, we just did a little filing all the way around the outside edge, right? But here, I'm going to have to draw this because it's not going to show up well on screen. Where's my whiteboard? So my little cowboy hat that I'm building, which is what it feels like, I've got curvature going two ways. So I've got this direction curve, screen, and I've got this direction curve. But my piece that I've built right now is squared up. So I have to get this to follow that curve. And then when we look at the corners, it has to sort of dip down to hit this direction curve as well. So this for me is always one of the most challenging parts of this conceptual kind of setting when I'm putting it into something curved, is how do I get the perfect curvature? And the only answer I've ever come up with is a little bit at a time. If anybody has magical, miraculous, like how to figure out your curve and put it, transfer it onto the metal well, I would love to hear it. Because it's just never been something that comes easy to me. Is I can figure out that I should take off this corner material, but as soon as I have 3 dimensions where I'm starting to then have to remember to go this way, it adds confusion to me. And the only way I can manage it is, again, a little bit at a time. There's a lot of things that, so one of the things I love about metalwork is the idea of working dimensionally. Like it does more for me than 2D drawing. I don't click as well with 2D drawing as I do with crafting something sculptural, 3-dimensional in my hands, until a certain point. And then it becomes so dimensional that my brain just wants to shut down on it. And I haven't figured out how to retrain myself to think about it differently. There are some people who can just see things in dimensions. Like if you've ever watched any of Nicole Ringgold's fabrication where she's producing a flower that she's picked in metal, she just seems to see the material transformed into the dimensions of the object she has sitting in front of her. And it's kind of astounding to me that some of our brains connect to that kind of transformation and some don't. Like there's a lot of things that I think about very dimensionally, and then I hit that wall. I don't know if that makes any sense or if I'm just rambling at this point.
No, it makes perfect sense. She is amazing.
Isn't she incredible?
Oh my gosh, she is out of this world amazing.
And she makes it so effortless. Just, oh, and now we have this complex lichen bracelet that looks exactly like the tree I just showed you. It's astounding.
Her life story is so interesting.
Is it?
If you ever, oh, it's amazing. She used to be a Peace Corps worker. That's where her and her husband met.
Yeah.
And if I'm not mistaken, I think she had dyslexia.
Yeah.
So it was very hard for her in the beginning. And it all morphed together for her when she started creating art.
Nice.
She is an amazing person. She really is. Great lady.
Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm getting the rough out of my outer curves, and then I'm peeking in and seeing what I see where it's still touching down in places that I don't want it touching down. So I'll trim a little bit off of one corner, check again where it's resting in the material, see where it's hitting. And I also like to look through and see the gaps because the light shining through is going to tell me where I need to take more material away, not where the light is, but where the light isn't. so that the light, whatever is resting down, that's not resting all the way down, goes lower on the piece. And getting pretty close. I've got a couple spots that are still a little high. And then I'm also going to start adding in that bevel still, because even though it's not a perfectly round dome, it is still a curved wall that I'll be soldering this to. So I want to give myself that extra connection for the solder. That is what the beveling of the outer edge is all about, is giving ourselves stronger connection on the solder. There's another fellow I follow whose name I can't recall off the top of my head, who makes these really intricate but completely clean lined rings that he's created little box forms that are all set into one another, and the stones are set at odd angles into them, a lot of square stone setting. And he just manages, he makes them like little puzzle pieces, and they just go clink, and then he solders them together. And they're perfect fits, and I just can't even begin to think about how much precision measuring and careful thought go into getting the perfect fit on those pieces. Say his name is Chris something, but I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm happy enough that I think my solder will do what it needs to do. One little bit of lift still on this one end. Let's see if I can take that out. So it's kind of an odd little shape that we end up with, not surprisingly, the opposite curvature to what our base is looking like. And I think I'm in good enough shape that I can solder this down, but because I've been manipulating it, I'm going to check that my stone still fits in before I go back to the bench, because nothing hurts like having soldered it down to realize that you squeezed it when you didn't think you did. And I'm going to go over to the block, to the soldering bench, and put this back in place. Flux action, position it. So it's going to be a little tricky to get well centered because one side gaps out further than the other on the stone. So it's a little off-putting. Some more hard solder out here. If you all are looking for any inspiration these days and you aren't following Danica Design Studios Battle of the Rings on Instagram, it's worth following, because the array of techniques and settings and things like that that are in the, I think it's 60 or 90 rings that are in the competition is just amazing. All kinds of really cool mechanisms, unusual and not necessarily practical settings. Just some really great production jewelry that people are, or one-of-a-kind jewelry that people have done, rather.
Yeah, I saw it in one of my Facebook groups. They mentioned it, and I went and I followed them on Instagram, and
Nice.
yeah, it's amazing.
What was the name of it again, you guys?
Say again?
What was the name of it again?
Danica Design Studios. They're out of Seattle, and it's a teaching school that I hear great things about and would love to teach at myself someday. But it's this thing they started, I think, during the pandemic, just to give artists another way of showing their work. And you have to send the rings in, and they're all for sale at the gallery. They put a book out about last year's competition. Oops, I managed to move my piece. Bear with me. too much talking, not enough paying attention. But they put out a book of the last year's exhibitors or participants. Come on, a little bit more. Ugh, a little bit more solder. Yeah. All the way around. Show. All right, and once again, I could just put the top on now, but now I've got a nice little domed piece. I'm not sure where I'm going to position the hook and whether I want to leave that lip going or not. But now, even if I were to trim that back to the wall, I would still have a really lovely dome over the top of my stone setting. And I have walls that I can get into. You do have to be careful. We don't want our walls here to go so high that we can't get in to set our stone, but that's not the case in this setting. I'm going to toss that in the pickle and pull out the other two that we did. And any questions? I know you're all rushing out for that new fabulous retro style tongue jewelry, right? Absolutely. We've all been waiting for this setting.
Yes, indeed. We are on it.
All right. Danica Designs. Thank you for whoever posted that. Natasha who posted that. Okay. So we now have our two variations. Let me get those up. Oh, you know what? I'm going to go back over to the good camera so you guys can see this a little more closely. Zoom in even more here. Okay, so we have version 1, which is the interior loop, right?
Right.
And when we put that in, the walls of the outer dome are going to be pushed in, and we're going to use epoxy to get that set in place. So it'll have like a little, it'll be more acorny on this
Rachel?
design. Yep.
You're out of the camera
out
a
of
little
focus.
bit.
Oh, thank you. Hang on, let me see if I can back out a little bit. Oop. Am I in again?
Yep.
Okay. So we've got version 1 where it's going to sit in there. And these walls will get closed around it, making it like an acorn cap, really. Right. And then we have version 2 where we built the extended wall. Covers a little bit more of the stone, this version of it, but it's also going to be a little bit more traditional of a pushing in of the wall for the straight wall, with the cap being a little bit separate from the design element. So they're both kind of acorny no matter what you do, but slightly different look. Okay. Questions about those? Caps, worth trying with bigger stones. When I find some bigger bullet stones, another stone setting that I found a little tricky to find in anything other than the decorative add-ons, I will probably do a couple in a larger size just to see what the difference is, and go from there. And any questions on the tongue setting so far?
So you managed to get the bezel by filing it one side and the other side,
Yeah.
to be able to get the cone to fit around it.
Yeah, and it's purely from my perspective, like I seriously, if anybody has a better approach to getting that curvature, drop stuff all over the floor, I would love to hear it. But my only way to achieve that I know of is a little bit at a time. So I first took the long ways and added curvature to the long sides. And then I took the ends and added the curvature to the ends. So I was careful when I did my long sides to not take material away from the center of each small end. because I needed to do that later when I had the second phase of it. And then it was touch it down, look for the air, look for the light gaps, tweak a little, because when there's a light gap, it means that something not where the light gap is holding it up, right? So I look for where does it touch down, take a little bit away, check it again, look for the light, touch down, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay.
I haven't got anything better. Anybody have other ideas for hitting unusual curves?
No, I haven't tried it.
3D modeling and have somebody cast or something. I don't know. I got nothing.
Rachel,
It's
did
just-
you use, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go
Did
ahead.
you use a round file?
No,
A half
no, I
round
used my
file?
barrette file.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
See, I used a half round file. You know how you do when you make a bezel and it's got to sit down into the ring and you have to take some of that out on the sides to make it sit down on it?
Yeah,
You know
so
what I'm
that's
talking
the opposite curve from what we were doing though. So
Right,
you're
right,
absolutely
right.
dead on with that. That's correct for an exterior curve or for a, concave. So you're talking about
Right.
like you're doing this and you're putting a bezel on, right? Like that?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I would absolutely use, well, I would probably use a crossing file because I find them better quality usually than the half round, but same difference. It also gives
Okay.
me more, I have one curve that goes like that and one that's a deeper curve when I'm using a crossing file. And my only
okay.
choice with a half round is that. So,
Yeah.
but
See,
another
I've never
trick
even
is-
heard of a crossing file before.
Oh, if I had, I'd have a hard time choosing between barrette and crossing file if I had only one on a desert island and was making jewelry.
Yeah, I
like
got
you
those
do.
barrette files in all different sizes because I was
Yeah.
very impressed with them.
Yeah, a crossing file is usually going to go both directions when you're filing, so it has a double hatch on it. But
Okay.
it is perfect for inside of ring curvatures and so on. But here's another trick for the one that you just described. You have a ring mandrel already.
Uh-huh.
Tape down some sandpaper onto your ring mandrel. It's going to
Uh-huh.
follow the curve of your ring already in most cases. And if you're
Okay.
sanding your stone down that, it'll follow the curve that you've already got built into your ring.
Cool. What a great
Right.
idea.
Right? So that's one thing. I mean, I still use both. I'll do my first pass with the sawing, but to do the final finessing of that kind of a setting, it's probably going to be little touch-ups on sandpaper on a mandrel. However, the curve that I was doing for this is convex. So I
Right.
have my thing that I'm putting it into is going like this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so my piece that I'm cutting is, I can't take a half round. I have to go this direction. I have to leave material. So I was trying to take off this portion and this portion so that it would follow the curve. And then I had to do the same, making a dip like that, right? So I'm leaving material, and it's really, if I were to look at it side on, I'd have removed a shape like that, leaving my walls going out, and this would go away.
Okay.
So this is, whenever I'm working on the outside of a curve, my go-to is going to be a half round, a flat file of some kind of barrette to get that takeaway. With the one exception being if I'm trying to touch up a seam on an outside ring, then I actually go to my crossing file, because my seam on the ring, let's make, let me get a better drawing than that. If I have my ring and I've got a seam running across it that I'm trying to clean up and make look nice, I want to only be touching down right there. So if I use a flat file, my surface area that's touching down is a lot bigger. If I use a crossing file on that, I have much more control. And only this little spot at the bottom of the curve is touching down on where I'm filing. So I use
Okay.
those files for interior work all over the place. I use crossing files. And then again, on outside curves when I'm trying to hit a specific small mark. Otherwise, I'm going to be probably on my barrette file.
Okay.
So yeah, that was the challenge on this particular piece is whatever curve, whatever boat you've made for the shape of the setting is what you have to then fit your basic bezel shapes bottom into. And it's a little more challenging than the reverse when we're setting it on a ring. So Let me see if that's done in the pickle so we can take a peek at what it looks like. And then we will hop on to one last setting this time. So here we go. We have our little cowboy hat. It really does look like a hat to me. Only one direction that this stone wants to go in. So let me make sure I get it right. There we go. That's not going to be a bad little decorative element, right? Again, I'd probably consider fancying it up by making pattern wire or pattern top, as long as you find a way to not bang up your shape. I probably will trim this down a little bit because it's a little bit more overhang visually than I necessarily want, but I don't know, maybe a bottom of a bolo tie or something, that would be an interesting shape. Same principles, it's a basic bezel, and same principles about how high up we have to go when setting this so that it'll hold the stone, which is very dependent on the curvature in your stone. If you have a straighter edge stone, you're either going to have to count on that epoxy or you're going to have to go higher up the stone. But also think about this. We've seen in John's descriptions that you can do variations on this theme. So what happens if we do have a taller, straighter stone? Let's say we have something that instead of having the curve that I've got right now, which is something like that, we go straight up before it curves. Nothing says we can't do a bezel that we trim back along the center so that it displays more of the stone, right? So if we have our little curved cap that we've got it sitting in, as long as I have enough material high up that will hold the stone, then I'm good. I still probably would touch up with epoxy. For part of the reason that John wants the epoxy is so we don't pool water in here by accident, but also, you know, we need to hold the stone still. So I might cut down my bezel in an interesting way to give myself the option to go higher up till I hit that curve point, but not hiding all of the stone, right? So give it thought. See what the first rule of thumb is, does it hold the stone? And the second rule of stone is how does it visually, what's the impact to my design? So when that's setting, that's kind of an interesting look for us. And it doesn't, again, have to have a big cap. If you can have no cap at all, you can just put a little bit of a curve in there. You can go straight up to the top. I think there's kind of a neat little bit with that overhang, but play around with it and see what works for the sake of A form or A function and B form. Questions about that? All right. I think we still have time to do one that I've been looking forward to, even though it is still yet again a basic bezel. How do we set conical stones? And we are now on the bottom of page 80, going into page 81. Well, actually, it's heavy. It's sort of a blend over from setting cone-shaped stone. So the middle of 80 on through to 81, but a lot of the drawings are over on 81. So the real challenge, and the one thing that he doesn't directly show us is, but it's implied in the bottom images on page 80, is that our cone is too steep for us to just compress our metal around if we leave it a whole bezel. So he's got the two volcano looking pictures at the bottom of page 80 on the right. And what he doesn't show is what happens when you try to push it in when it's a solid wall, which is that you can't compress your metal enough to either hold the stone or not have wrinkles in it or ripples. So he's proposing multiple decorative ways to give yourself room to squish, basically, right? To press the metal down around the stone. And I'm going to do the basic Castellation version, I think, for this. So once again, it starts with our stone and a basic bezel in this case. I'm going to use 24 gauge just because the thicker you get with this, the more you're going to need. I'm going to actually go up to a 22 gauge. But the thicker you get on this, the more material you're needing to get out of the way of the project, of the setting. So let me get my little handy dandy buried under too many tools dividers, and I'm going to go with that 1/4 to 1/3 ish rule. I'm going to go somewhere in there. But certainly this doesn't need a whole heck of a lot of height because it's a steep angle, but it needs enough material for us to be able to cut away and do something interesting too. I'm just going to make a strip of 22 gauge. Once again, this is most important on a round, but if you had, I've seen pyramid cut stones that have this kind of a steep angle, similar concept, just in a square. So you could design your cutaways so that the corners are clear, or you could design it so it only has material covering the both corners. But the same principle applies. If the angle is too steep, we're not going to get enough room to push our material down, right? And so we have to find a way to give it that room. This is really, if we think about it, this is the same principle. Earlier in the book, he showed us that we need to cut away our corners as one option. Oh, made that too small. We need to cut away our corners when we're doing a stone that has corners. Like I think he showed it in the rectangular drawings on the bezel setting. And ultimately what we're doing is making room one way or the other for the folding down of what would otherwise be overlapping that material. One of the reasons I suspect he spent so much time on this particular chapter is that we're going to find lessons rolling forward to other pieces of settings that we're doing later on. It's all sort of ultimately built on the concepts we learned in this chapter. Almost all, not all settings are based on this, but there's some elements of the preparation and the dimensionality that we need to have. I really need bionic eyes so that I can just go in and out of focus wherever I'm looking. My doctor finally convinced me to get driving glasses, and they were kind of miraculous. Oh, hey, that's what it's like when you can read the street signs as you drive. Okay, so that's going to be good. I'm going to have to size it up a smidge. Again, always go in favor of too small versus too big. Okay, hopping over to solder. Back to the bench. We're going to round this out and size it up. Okay, this definitely needs sizing up further. So I'm going to do that trick I talked about where I'm working upside down against a steel wall of some kind. And switching directions. And all this is doing is just like if you were sizing up a ring, it's just giving you something that pushes back and helps force the material down to stretch it a little bit. There we go. And can I put it in from the top is the important part. Okay, so basic bezel wall. The only thing different is that our stone cones in a lot more than it would otherwise. So I'm going to flatten the back of this, just like for any other basic bezel. We're back to the basic bezel again that we learned very first thing in the book. Boy, what I'm learning is that when it's on the flat surface, I'm going through my sandpaper a little faster than I tend to do when I'm not on the plexiglass. I'm loving it because it's working quickly. But I don't know, it's just interesting that having it so flush and flat makes the sandpaper wear out faster. All right, so I've got a flat surface because I've been manipulating it. I'm just going to make sure that I still can fit from above. I can. And I'm going to grab a scrap of something. I tend to make the back sides of my basic bezels on a decorative material if I have it. I've got a scrap of something interesting. Will that fit? Just fit. Just to give, a little bit of secret bling for whoever's wearing the piece that it's made into. And I would obviously, if it was the only stone going on, I would try to stamp my mark, my maker's mark on this before I set it down. But in this case, I'm just going to solder it down. Okay, I would normally be going to medium solder, but as a reminder on the basic bezels, John is strongly encouraging us to try and use hard solder, even for soldering it down to something, so that we have other options further down when we're adding it to a piece. And the only time he uses easy is on the final setting, attaching of the setting to a project, so that if somebody has to repair it later, they can. We don't need more solder than that. So again, I've chosen a 22 gauge wall, which is a little heavy, but not super heavy wall, just so that I can have some material to cut away in this particular design. There we go. It's good. And this could easily just be a standard cabochon bezel at this point. Pop back over and trim away a lot of the excess. As a reminder, leave your final sanding and filing till the last minute you'll be able to reach that spot. So I'm just doing a rough trim away because I know in later steps I'll be able to get the final sanding and filing done. But if I solder it again, that means that my solder won't flow away and leave me with divots in my material if I haven't completely filed away. Basic cup, right? So now I need to decide what kind of castellation I want to do. One of the easiest is the directly opposite each other, and he shows the bottom image on page 81, where he's just put a divide down the center. It could be a round divide like he's done there. It could be an angled divide, whatever it is, as long as we've made room so that when we close things together, there's gap that it's going to be pushing into, we're golden. Or we can do something a little fancier and make multiple points along it. Could be 4, it could be 3, you know, you can decide how you want to do it. It could be uneven, you know, there's nothing that says that they have to be exactly opposite each other. You could do 2 on one side and 1 on the other and make it be a visual element of the design. The whole mission of taking material away is making room to do the setting. So in this case, I figure, let's see, do I have my little chart of round? Well, I think I drew myself a chart because I couldn't find my other one. Bear with me a second while I find my box up paper. There we go. So there's all kinds of great templates you can find for circle maps where it'll give you the grid. But if you're desperate, like I was when I couldn't find mine, you can just mark it out on some graph paper and then mark your piece in the positions that you want to, in the spots that you want to take material away. Where did I put my little black pen? And I'm finding that when I have it marked out well, if I'm doing even ones, I just rotate to the next position so that I get equal spacing between each set. My pen will work. Hang on a second. Pen is dying on me. Let's see. Surely I have more black Sharpie markers within reach. There we go. 2, go. Okay, so once I've got them marked out, I'm just marking on the top of my bezel wall where each one hits, because then my next step is going to be sawing a slight groove down in. You could also do this carefully with burrs if you wanted to, if you have the hand control to get a good cut in with a burr, you could, like a barrel burr or something. On something as tiny, I certainly do not have that level of hand control, so I'm going to start with a quick saw, and then I'll switch over to files. So in this case, I'm just trying to get the across from each other's started. Needs today.
Hey, Rachel,
So, yep.
Jim Branvick has a tool. It's called Top Jaws. It's to make those castellated bezels.
Did Pepe just start producing it for him?
No, I don't know if they did or they've got their own.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had his for, gosh, many years now.
Oh, okay.
And it is fantastic, you guys. I mean, it makes it so simple.
Can you
I mean, you
post,
just,
post a link to it in the chat?
oh, I don't know how to do that. It's on, how about I put it on the site?
Sure.
Hey, I'm not that into the computer thing, okay?
That's okay.
But it's Jim Brandvix, but I will do it for you. He is fantastic.
Thank you.
There's
Highly
another
recommend it.
guy who's come out with one. But I think Brandvix is better.
Oh, yeah?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Pepe,
somebody-
I think, came out with one too, but I don't know if it's his or not. I think they
Yeah.
have their own.
Cute
Could
Femme
be.
Gray did a comparison, I think, and you know, it was easier with Jim's because it's the other one was a little limited on the size and the thickness of the metals and stuff.
Gotcha.
But his is called Bezel. I don't know, I have it right here.
I found
Why
it.
use
I
so
put it
little
in the
plastic?
chat.
Oops, sorry,
Oh,
go ahead.
thank you, Natasha. You're awesome. Yeah, I
Yeah,
use
Bez-
18 gauge, you guys, when I cut mine.
Bez
Nice.
Jaws and Top Jaws,
Huh.
JAWZ.
And if you're not going on a curve like this tiny little thing, I think I mentioned it the last time we were on. Anne Havel makes her tabs by putting a
Right.
pair of separating discs separated by a couple of washers. And
Right.
that gives you a perfect, you can just repeat your distance apart for putting castellation in. Super simple way to get adjustments made along a wall. Just a little
Yeah,
hard. to
I've heard of that before.
I just don't do a whole lot of castellation in my work because I'm not setting the kinds of stones that tend to need it or doing the style of jewelry that often has it. So what I'm doing now, gang, is I've made my initial cuts and I'm now going in with a triangle file to start widening down the saw mark that I've made. And I'll show this in a moment so you can see the start of the castellation that I'm doing. And you could do nothing but triangle file shape and make an interesting tab. That's probably not showing well on camera. So let me draw for you the shape of the current tab. So what I've done first is I made my wall, same old, same old. I did a little bit of a saw cut into each of the quadrants that I want. And now I'm taking down a triangle amount. So I'm making the castle parts into this kind of a shape. Okay. And I'll go as deep or as little as I need to get to a point where I think I can bend. I need enough depth to give myself the movement when I squish my material in. And I can choose to curve it, which is what I'll probably do on this one because it's a nice, gentle look to a stone. Or I could literally just make the slice all the way down and do nothing but a saw blade's worth. What I need is, again, enough spaces, depending on the angle of my stone, that when I push things inward, they're just going to compress in and fill the gap on each other, right? So that's all I'm doing at this point is carving in either with bits or with files, round files, triangle files, whatever gives you the profile that interests you in your design. You're going to just work your way into it in the setting.
So how do you know when you've taken out enough material?
So
to
the real
push?
trick, yeah, the real trick is it's going to depend on how steep your cone is. Because if you have like a super high cone, you don't have as much steepness as if I've got this pyramid, the type thing that I'm looking at. The wider the angle at the base, the more material you have to take down, the lower you have to go. And it's also going to be about the total height of your setting. So if you've got a very short setting, you only need enough to start pushing it in. As with any other fitting, like on the corner settings of our bezels, you can always come back with a saw and just carefully, as you're doing it, saw a little further down and then push in a little bit more, saw a little further down and push in more. So you can touch this up while you're setting.
Thank you.
Sure. So again, right now I'm just going with the triangle to get my start. And I'm going, right now I'm going about a third of the way down. I think I want to get a little deeper than that because I don't think that's going to be enough on this steep angle. And I can switch to a half round. I can switch to using my barrette files, whatever profile. I'm going to go to the barrette files and see what I can get out of this. I think I may have to actually cut further down for that very reason that we just talked about, which is I need to have enough material away to really get the push in. I'm trying again to just work across from each other when I do them opposite one another. I do the sawing of both sides at the same time. I just have to flip it around and make sure that I go equal depths on both sides. It also helps keep it a little bit more upright so I don't go off the path as much. No famous last words. I'm going about 2/3 of the way down on this particular setting. And I'd love to give you more exacting measurements, but it really, the answer is almost always in stone setting going to be, it depends on the stone. How is it cut? How does it fit? Are there any funny spots in it that are too lumpy or that stick out at an angle different than the rest of it? Okay. So I'm getting down to about here on this setting. And you can, you know, measure it out and mark it out and go directly to the exact line on each one if you're going to be nice and precise about it. I tend to be an eyeball it kind of gal, probably more than I should be.
So I have another question.
Yep.
You don't want the castellations to touch each other, right? When you push it over this, like to overlap.
Right. By the time you're setting it, they need to just at best butt up against each other, but they could be further apart than that as long as your wall is thick enough.
Okay.
Sorry, I should let you finish your question before I start answering. I apologize. Was
You
that
just
what you were
read
looking-
my mind.
Okay. Yeah, the whole goal is we never want to be doing this with our material. We want to do this, but if we start out like that, it's eventually going to get that closure as we push in. This is when we get to the setting on this one, or if you're doing one at home, it's worth doing your first pass of pushing in and looking at it really carefully, like look at it from the side and see just how much material starts to close together, because you can make wider gaps than you think. If you think of it, this is just essentially making a bunch of prongs out of our wall. They're just really close together prongs, and they might get so close together that they no longer look prongy by the time we're done. I'm going to go in with a bigger file and try to get a little more material away.
I have used a template that a lot of people use for stamping, and
Yeah.
it's Impress Art.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a ruler and it's a sticker.
Oh, nice.
And then you can just put the sticker right on the metal. And it's
Yeah,
just like
nice.
a Castellation pattern. They have it for circles and they have it for, you know, a flat, straight edge.
Cool.
And I
You could
find-
also make your own by putting a thin piece of masking tape around that you open back up, lay out, and mark up your settings, and then cut to that. So yeah, there's all different kinds of approaches to templating this. And nothing says you couldn't make, you know, like if you have one of those cool Castellation cutting tools, nothing says you couldn't make a strip of it and build your wall pre-castellated, you know. It's a little harder to solder. It puts it a little more at risk where there's narrow parts of the material. But
yeah,
it doesn't have to start life as a nice flat wall. And the other thing is these could always be just set in any of the fancy gallery wire that has nice pointy bits that come up, because that gives you enough room It's just a slightly different durability. Those are going to be a little bit weaker if they catch on something, more likely to pull away. This is a little bit more meaty of a setting.
Mhm.
That, by the way, is another thing that'll influence how deeply you have to go into the material. If you're using a heavier gauge, a much heavier gauge, you'll need to take more away because, again, it's about where is it compressing to as you push in. So a 22 gauge for me is sort of a medium weight for this kind of a setting. All right, so I've got a good rough draft. I don't know, let me bring it over to the good camera. Yeah, the screen. Focus for us. So I'm hoping that you guys can see a little bit of that castellation in there.
Yeah.
And that's, I don't have to go much more than that. That's probably enough. I may need to check that I've gone down far enough that when the material squishes, I think it's going to really tighten up on itself. But it'll end up basically looking like a little serrated edge. Oops, I'm out of camera. A little serrated edge all around the top of the stone. And this can be an upright setting. It can be a hung setting. I could just put a jump ring or something on the top again and have it hang. But that's pretty much all there is to it. Similar to the other kinds of decorative adjustments we can make earlier in the book. I'm going to toss this in the pickle and see whether we have any open questions. All right, I think that was everything I intended to do today. Let me double check my notes. We did bullet version 1 and 2. We did the tongue cabochon. We did the conical cabochon. Next session will be the last, hopefully 3 settings in the book, or in the chapter rather. And that I say hopefully because I am running between craft shows on various coasts. So I'll be in New York and then coming back for a few days and being in doing the Cogswell thing in between that and the next day getting ready for another show out here. So I may be a little frazzled and not manage 3 settings, 2 of which I've never done before. And probably won't have any time to practice between now and then, but I don't know. I'm very excited because I have never in my entire life set a teardrop / briolette as anything other than a bead. So I'm interested to see how this goes. I do, so only one of them that I haven't done. I love reverse settings. And I'm a little disappointed John doesn't go into more detail on that section. But boy, you can do some phenomenal and really unusual looking things with stones you already have once you realize the potential of reverse settings. So that I'm looking forward to that. If we get through all 3 of those, then the 5/18 dates will be stone setting galore. And between now and then, do I have other things to promote? If you are in the Oregon area, come see me at the Gathering of the Guilds, along with several other people that are on this call who are from the area. And I'm going to post my set of the usual links. I did get my Metalworks clasp class confirmed and set up. And that is a bunch of different clasps from wire-based to box clasp to a keyhole clasp. It's going to be a 2-day workshop, so it's a weekend-only thing in July.
And it's finally on their website, by the way.
Finally on their website, yes. I'm sorry about that. I thought they had it up, but they were back and forth, and we missed some emails where they were saying they wanted it 2 days instead of 3. So it's now straightened out there. My next class is actually hollow forms, which is one of my favorite things ever. And if you haven't built hollow forms before, boy, hollow forms combined with some really great stone setting can rock your world. It's one of the things I did when I first wanted to up my game and add a lot more dimensionality to my work. And that is a 3-day virtual workshop. which is, I guarantee those are much slower paced than what we're going through here. It's a lot of, I demo, I send you back to your bench, you do some stuff, you come back, we talk about it. So it's much more paced for an actual teaching model. And then at the end of the year will be my Bezel's Less Ordinary class. And those are the last of my currently scheduled teaching events, other than this, of course. So that's what's on my plate. Anybody have any show and tell this week? I would love to see your work if you've got something going on, or any other questions.
You know what? I think it would be fabulous if you did that tongue setting in a box design. You know, put it at the bottom. That would be really awesome.
Put it at the bottom. I'm trying to pick. So you mean a box clasp with a tongue setting?
Yeah.
As the plunger, are you thinking? Or as
I don't know. You could do it. I don't know. You could do it at any kind of thing. I was just thinking if you made like the box and hung it at the bottom.
Oh, so your clasp is down the front of the necklace and it's hanging off of it?
Yeah.
Huh.
But somehow connected to it, connected to the bottom of it somehow. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I can see that. I can also see it as a dangle if you were using a box clasp on a bracelet, although people might find it like gets in the way. I'm not sure that would go over as well.
Well, if it was a short one, it would.
Yeah. So the cool thing, like these conical, I didn't think I was going to be excited by these conical stones, but that's kind of a funky little thing that you can just add a little surprise. Like I could see it hanging off of the back of a chain clasp or something. Just because I do pearls
I made one of those.
Yeah.
In sodalite. I made one of those in sodalite. I'm going to have to set that booger.
Yep. There's all kinds of possibilities once you start thinking about these other settings. Anybody have something to show, or shall we call it a night?
Call it a night.
Call it a night. Okay, gang. Happy making, and yay, soon we get to go to prong setting. June will be prong setting month, and probably partially July, although there's all kinds of scheduling stuff in there that we'll have to juggle around. So yeah, make bezels, and I'll see you in 2 weeks. 2 weeks. I think
Thank
it's
you,
2 weeks.
Rachel.
Yay, thank you. Great class.
Like your haircut.
Thank
Rachel.
you. Fabulous
Thanks.
class.
Thank you. Good night, all.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night.